welcome to Saturday Mornings here on BBC Radio Scotland with me, Shereen Nanjiani, and my guest today. We've got food and drink writer Rachel McCormick, former Scottish Conservative councillor Ewan Blockley, and the Herald's Brian Beacom. Good morning to you all.
Good morning.
And this week we're going to be talking about a huge week in Scottish politics with a First Minister resigning and another emerging. We'll talk about 3 different TV adaptations of best-selling books with The Tattooist of Auschwitz, Shardlake and A Man in Full. But which is the most successful in the page-to-screen transition? Plus, is 92 minutes really the ideal movie length? And if you're taking your kids to a Taylor Swift gig, would you sign up for a college course to bring you up to speed? All that and a lot more. So let's have a listen to some of this week's big moments.
So grateful and so blessed for having the opportunity that are afforded to so few to lead my country. And who could ask for a better country to lead than Scotland?
People will ask, how long will I be around? I am no caretaker. I'm offering to lead my party through the Westminster elections and to lead us beyond the 2026 elections, 2 contests which I intend to win for the SNP and for Scotland.
Mr. Sokolov,
Call me Lally.
you're looking for someone to write your life story.
So this is a love story.
Welcome to Auschwitz.
We've now had 5 parliamentary by-elections with swings of over 20% from Conservative to Labour. You put all this together and you have to say the message to the Conservative Party is going to be you are still in a very deep electoral hole.
I love you with all my heart. So, will you marry me?
What?
All that and more to come here on BBC Radio Scotland with me, Shereen Nanjiani. And get in touch with your thoughts on anything we're talking about this morning. You can text me on 80295. That's charged at your standard network message rate, or use the hashtag Shereen on social media. And we're going to start today by getting my guests' moments of the week. No politics, we're coming to that shortly. So I'm joined by Ewan Blockley, Rachel McCormick and Brian Beacom. Ewan, let's talk to you first. No politics.
No
I know you're
politics.
desperate to get stuck into that, but something a little sunnier.
Yeah. So this week we booked our first kind of holiday for this year because it's just been absolutely so hectic so far. Away to Mallorca, which is fantastic for a couple of days. And
A couple of days.
Yeah, and we're looking forward to it, I think, because most importantly, it's an adult-only hotel, which is great. So when you drink, when you're waking up in the morning, you're not having to deal with screaming wains. But also as well, I think just getting away and actually booking that was a holiday in itself. I mean, I think it was Kevin, but I just said that in his stand-up years ago, and it was 100% true, because when you book the holiday, that is a wee holiday in itself, because you're already picturing yourself on the beach with a cocktail, and you know, August cannot come soon enough. So counting the days.
Not till August, but I do think that is true. I get more out of a holiday that I've booked well in advance than one I've booked at the last minute, because I'm just sort of, it's something to aim for, isn't
Absolutely.
it? Absolutely.
Yeah, gets you through the tough days for sure.
Meantime, actually, he's talking about looking forward to summer. We've just had spring, and that is your moment of the week.
Well, I think
Finally.
February ended at the weekend. I think February seemed to have lasted about 100 days. And there is that thing when I look out the window of my bedroom and there's those trees that just refuse to have any blossom or any leaves on them. And there was always a point at the end of April when I think, this is done. I'm going to be wearing gloves and hats for like the rest of my life, and these trees are always going to be bare and barren. And then all of a sudden you wake up and it's all
Ta-da!
got blossom from one day to the next, and everything's full of leaves. And then there's that sweet spot in the week where the birds don't wake you up at 4:30 in the morning. So that'll happen next week when I'll get fed up. And it's that great thing about this week when it's just, you think this is actually genuinely over, because daffodils come out and they lie to you, and they make you think that spring is happening.
Yeah.
And it's still freezing
Yeah.
and wet and cold, and sometimes it snows. But once the trees blossom and there's no going back from that, it's over now. February is finished.
Are you saying I can put away the puffer? Because I'm not sure. I want to, but I'm not sure.
You can put away the
got a bit
puffer.
cooler
You
today.
can put away the thermal underwear. I don't even need thermal underwear now when I go swimming. It is brilliant.
Oh, you do the wild swimming,
I
don't
do
you?
the cold swimming, and I don't need to put the thermal underwear on anymore. It is amazing.
Glorious.
It's actually happening. There is no going back.
Okay, so even if I'm freezing, basically, the puffer.
Just get on with it.
Okay, okay. The calendar tells me to get on with it. Your moment of the week, Brian, is an indoor one.
Yeah, it's a wee bit unusual for me. I've been feeling a bit sorry for myself this week because of, as you can probably tell, I've got a wee bit of a man cold there. But the strange thing about it turned out quite well for me, because I was flicking through some television channels and I was looking for something to watch, and I came across an old series from the 80s called Just Good Friends, and you probably won't know of this one at all. It was a love story. It was about a young couple who you thought would get together. They decided to stay friends, but there was a love story there which attached to them, and eventually it all sort of worked out. And it was great fun. It was really well produced comedy written by John Sullivan, and it was starring Jan Francis and Paul Nicholas. And the thing about attracting me to Paul Nicholas was he wasn't the most fantastic actor of all time, but he's been a consistent performer over the years. He's been a musical theatre star. He appeared in Jesus Christ Superstar over the years. He appeared in Tommy. He's just been a great overall performer. But the thing about Paul Nicholas, what really caught me about him this week as well, he also appeared in the papers when he's appearing in the new stage show Fawlty Towers, and he's playing the old Major. So what was incredible, this transformation that I found difficult to understand in a sense, was that Paul Nicholas was one of the most handsome, good-looking guys on television back in the 80s. He had the curly hair and the blue eyes, and every single woman and maybe lots of men fancied Paul Nicholas as well. But here he was now, this week, pictured balding, looking very much his age. And what it really struck me about it was how bold and how brave and how much of an actor that Paul Nicholas is, that we all have to accept that life's casts us in older roles. We're never going to look the same, but now he has to accept it in public. Not only does he accept it, he defies expectation. He's prepared to go out there and be that crotchety old figure. So what an incredible contrast.
Kind of like yourself, Brian, eh?
I'd like to think I was that defiant, but I'm not. But I thought, how wonderful of Paul Nicholas to go out there and be himself and say, I am an 80-year-old man and I accept it.
Tell me, I have very fond memories of Just Good Friends. Has it aged well?
I think it really has. I mean, there are a couple of little moments in it you might go, I'm not quite sure about that, but it really has. The jokes are still so strong, and to hold that will they, won't they romance over 3 incredible series, yeah, it's worth watching again.
Do you think Ewan would like it?
I've written it down, so I'm going to get a shot.
I think he might. Yeah, he seems a romantic sort of fellow.
Well, before we move on, I just wanted to mention another lovely moment of the week. Certainly for one Scottish singer, Take That were performing at the Hydro across the water from us in Glasgow last night, and they were supposed to be supported by Ollie Murs, but Ollie's flight was cancelled and they needed someone to fill in at the last minute. So enter Cambus Lang's Daniel Rooney, who'd been performing at the bar in the Radisson Red and was asked to open for the group. There's pictures all over the papers of him this morning. What a moment for that young man.
Yeah, I saw it on Twitter last night, and it's one of those stories that you're instantly like, good for you. That's fantastic. And
He
I think,
must have been terrified.
I mean, it was the crowds as well, because I saw the video of it and they're all singing along, and you're like, imagine that moment. You know, you think about the whiplash you would have that, you know, an hour before, or, you know, when you were going to your work or going to your to that gig in the Radisson, to all of a sudden being in the Hydro and thinking, imagine a couple hours ago if you said to me, by the way, see, at the end of the day, you'll be in the Hydro playing in front of all these people. So, no, it's fantastic.
And
And I hope
I just love the connection. It's Ross King, the old Radio Clyde DJ who became, you know, the king in LA, and he's that showbiz figure. He's connected to absolutely everybody, and only Ross King would be able to walk into a bar and think, wait a minute, we're down a band here. We need somebody to fill in. Why don't we have you? And that's the sort of thing.
So it was Ross that facilitated
He
it all.
facilitated it. Yeah, that just sounds so exactly like the sort of thing that Ross King
looking
would do.
forward to the streaming adaptation drama of this event and how this becomes a film.
An
or an 8-part TV series of exactly how this happens, and then the happiness at the end of it, and the getting on the stage.
Well, of course, the end will be his headlining.
Who knows?
yeah.
I mean, we've got another 2 weeks to go. How much does, what happens after this for the guy?
I just hope they take him on tour rather than Ollie Moore's, because Ollie's had his chance. So give this year's Bill a
We like Ollie Moores. But anyway, well done to Daniel Rooney. And we wish him well for the future. Who knows what will come after this. And still to come, can a love story work when it's set in a concentration camp? We'll find out what our panel make of The Tattooist of Auschwitz. And is the ideal movie running time really 92 minutes? Now, it's a cliche because it's true. A week is a long time in politics. It was Monday that Hamza Yusuf officially announced his resignation from the position of First Minister and leader of the SNP.
Politics can be a brutal business. It takes its toll on your physical and mental health. Your family suffer alongside you. I am in absolute debt to my wonderful wife, my beautiful children, and my wider family for putting up with me over the years. I'm afraid you'll be seeing a lot more of me from now. You are truly everything to me. And although, of course, as you can tell, I'm sad that my time as First Minister is ending, but I am so grateful, I'm so blessed for having the opportunity that are afforded to so few to lead my country. And who could ask for a better country to lead than Scotland?
Well, that emotional resignation speech was the starting gun for who would replace him as the leader of the SNP, with former leader John Swinney and runner-up in the last contest, Kate Forbes, immediately emerging as the front runners. John Swinney made his pitch of unity to SNP members on Thursday morning.
We have many talented people leading the work of the Scottish Government. I want Kate Forbes to play a significant part in that team. She is an intelligent, creative, thoughtful person who has much to contribute to our national life. And if elected, I will make sure that Kate is able to make that contribution. And that will be part of a united team that draws together our whole party, which, given my deep, deep devotion to the SNP, I think I am best placed to put together.
Well, Kate Forbes later confirmed in a statement that she would not stand in the contest and endorsed John Swinney. She said she would join John Swinney and advocate for that reform agenda within the Scottish Government. So unless someone else steps forward, it looks likely that John Swinney will become our new First Minister this week. Let me take you back to that very emotional resignation speech from Hamza Yusuf, and talking about the challenges of being First Minister. Did you feel for him, Brian?
I think it's impossible not to feel for someone on a human level who's lost his job, who's clearly been so dedicated to the work that he's done. He's been part of the SNP for such a long time, so I think you can't not be affected by that. But having said all that, what you have to put in perspective are the reasons why it all came about in the first place, and the reasons being is because Hamza Yusuf couldn't negotiate with the Green Party. What Hamza Yusuf did when he fell out with the Greens over the proposals, there was that he went out and bought a gun and shot himself in both feet, and he effectively...
And he kind of held his hands up to that afterwards.
Yeah. Okay, you hold your hands up to it, but you still did it, and who around him was telling that it was a good idea to take on the Greens in such a manner? Now, the Greens had already threatened to walk. The position was incredibly precarious at that point in time, but that's what it comes down to a First Minister, to act like a First Minister and show the skills, negotiating tact, to be able to sit down with them and say, look, what do you expect to happen here, and what can we agree to happen in the future? He didn't do any of that. He pushed them right out the door.
What do you think of that resignation speech?
I thought the resignation speech was fine, and everybody gets a chance to say their goodbyes, and it was a very long goodbye, and it was clearly emotional. However, we're not talking about emotion here. That's not really the important thing. We're talking about the future of our country. We're talking about the person who should be running a country and taking it forward, and the direction that they're likely to move in. And it was clear that Hamza Yusuf didn't have a direction, and as a result, he shouldn't have been in that position any longer.
Would you agree with that, Rachel?
I think the thing is, nobody can really get over how badly this was managed by Hamza and whoever was advising him. You know, as Brian said, you don't just turn round and say to the Greens, you're out. I mean, the Greens are not the most tactical and most clever and strategic of politicians that anybody's ever seen in any parliament. But at the same time, you've got an agreement with him. You somehow have to make that agreement work. And it is like he just shot himself in the feet. I don't really understand why. I do think on a bigger scale, I do think it's kind of time that 2014 was over. And I do kind of think with Hamza, it kind of is over. I think that there's been this kind of post referendum time that's gone on for a decade, which I think needs to end. And I do think we need to turn and go, well, where are we as a country, and what's going on, and what do we want to do as a country, rather than just have this constant never-ending we've had for the past decade. Which, you know, that part of the problem is that's really what the opposition parties push massively as well. Mm-hmm. It's not just one party or another. I think Sweeney being in the main... The thing about Sweeney is that nobody hates him in the party, which I think is a massive thing, given the fact that any party that's been in power for as long as the SNP does always, by law of averages, no matter where they are in the world, kind of descend into a lot of backstabbing and infighting. I think that nobody hates him, I think, is a really big thing. I think Forbes would be slightly more controversial, and also I think she's very young, and why would she want this poison chalice? I mean, you'd get one chance to be First Minister, which Alex Salmond would do very well to remember. I think it would be a mistake for her own person to really go in there going guns and be the next First Minister, because who knows how long all of this is going to last. I do also think Dougie Ross should probably be commended for being the first Tory to actually remember that votes of no confidence are generally threatened against other parties, not your own, because Tories haven't really managed to do that for about the past 9 years. So it was kind of actually good to see somebody remember politics should be about stabbing the other parties, not their own in the back. It's been a bit of a mess.
Well, let's ask the Conservative on the panel for your thoughts on Hamza and then John Swinney.
Yeah, so I mean, I think Rachel was quite right to recognise that Douglas Ross, and the reason why we are where we are is because of the no confidence vote that Douglas Ross so rightly laid to Parliament, and we would end up being stuck essentially with Hamza Yusuf had it not been for the decisive leadership of Douglas Ross. And he had a fantastic week this week, whether it was First Minister's questions, whether it was the vote of no confidence that Labour submitted, where he spoke about not so honest John and maybe got a bit of a rap in the knuckles from the presiding officer. But I think in terms of Hamza Yusuf, look, he's been a disastrous First Minister, whether it's standards in our schools where you've got violence against teachers rocketing, whether you've got our A&E wait times where they're some of the worst in the UK, where you've got drug deaths that are the worst in the entire continent of Europe. If you look at any metric, this man has failed. He's continued on from a legacy of failure from Nicola Sturgeon, and is actually sizably worse, because unlike Nicola Sturgeon, he wasn't even remotely good at the communications element of it. So he was always, in my view, he was always going to fail. It was really a matter of when and not if.
So what do you think of his probable successor, John Swinney? Because, is he the right person to reach across and make agreements? Because we're hearing that, he's well respected, he's well liked. And in the past, certainly, in terms when he was finance secretary, he was able to work with other parties to get the budget through.
Yeah, I mean, I think that Swinney has long gone. Someone who has been involved in politics for a number of years and has watched John Swinney at First Minister's Questions, for example, when he stepped in for Nicola Sturgeon, the clapping seal that he's commonly referred to, because he would often just completely over-exaggerate himself, as I think most politicians do at FMQs, but he took it to a new level. I don't think he's as well respected as he was when he was working as Finance Secretary under Alex Salmond. I think a lot of that is gone. And I think, honestly, the only allies that the SNP have now in Parliament are the Greens. Labour certainly won't want to work with them because, of course, they want an election. We, of course, won't want to work for them.
You don't want an election anyway. That's
we would welcome.
No circumstances.
We would 100% welcome a Scottish election. I think this idea is frankly nonsense, because we want to hold this SNP government to account, and more importantly, than not kick them out. I think as Scottish Conservatives, one thing we've certainly proven over the last 2 weeks is we will do whatever it takes to get rid of the SNP, whether that be the First Minister or whether that be in general. And also, of course, we voted with Labour in that vote of no confidence. So if we didn't want an election, we certainly wouldn't have voted with them on it.
Okay. I'm saying that it's likely that John Swinney, unless someone else comes forward, will be First Minister. Do you think it would have been better, Brian, to have a contest rather than a coronation?
Absolutely, it would have been, because that's what democracy is all about. It's about the best choice candidate for the job. But I don't think there were that many options there. In fact, there weren't that many options there. As Rachel points out, Kate Forbes wasn't going to pick up that task anytime soon and stick her hat into the ring, because it's just not the right time. And I don't think the climate's ready for a Kate Forbes, given her lack of socially progressive views.
You think that people, who are you saying is not ready for that? The voters or the party?
I think the party's not ready for it. And I think the bigger question would be, how would be Kate Forbes projected onto an international screen, for example, when you have to hold up that's a prospective First Minister of Scotland who has such restricted views. I think that would be a huge difficulty for her. But where I think, I'll try and be positive here in terms of the SNP at this moment in time, where I think they have a positive going from at this moment in time, they have looked to dump those socially progressive intentions that they had set out in recent years. And I think what they're trying to do now is focus on the economy. That's what John Swinney keeps talking about. That's what we're going to be looking at. They're going to be looking at the economy. They're going to be looking at education. And really, that's what matters at this moment in time to people in Scotland.
Yeah, he also says he's not going to be a caretaker.
He doesn't. I don't know if I believe that. And I'm not saying he's an outlier, but what he thinks at this moment in time and what might happen in 2 years' time may be a different thing. I think he is a caretaker. And I think you have to remember as well, John Swinney was a leader was First Minister before for 4 years, and he was very unsuccessful. There's no indication that as a person, as a politician, he's going to be successful now.
We will see what happens later in the week.
Is his mum, she hangs out with the stars. Chris is Chris's dad, he hangs out at the bar. Kieran is his brother, he is a record plugger. And Chris completes the family, he's a cheeky little chappy. The Chris Moyle Show.
Right, Right now you're listening to BBC Radio Scotland with Shereen Nanjiani and my guests Brian Beacom, Ewan Blockley and Rachel McCormick. Well, now to the first of 3 book adaptations that we're reviewing on TV this week. The Tattooist of Auschwitz is based on Heather Morris's best-selling book of the same name. It sold millions of copies and also caused some controversy. It's a love story in the darkest of settings inside the Nazi concentration and extermination camp of Auschwitz-Birkenau.
Mr. Sokolov,
Call me Lally.
you're looking for someone to write your life story.
So this is a love story.
Welcome to Auschwitz.
This is what it was every morning.
The new tattooist. I am now in charge of you.
Tattoo people. It's not something I can do. Every time I open my eyes, I am still there.
You have to find something in your mind. A good thing. You can't get in here.
But I found something there. Someone.
Well, the tale is told years later by Harvey Keitel as Lally Sokolov speaking to a biographer about the grim events. The book the drama is based on has at times drawn criticism for inaccuracies. The Auschwitz Memorial Research Centre said it contained errors and exaggerations, misinterpretations and understatements. Morris has defended her artistic licence. So I'm really interested to know what you think. Were you familiar with this book? Had you read it, Brian?
No, I hadn't read the book, no. But I found the story was really interesting, and it's attracted such an incredible amount of controversy. This adaptation.
I think because it was one critic posed the question: can fiction ever be an appropriate response to the Holocaust? I think it was that idea of juxtaposing a love story, albeit based on a true one, but fictionalising it slightly amid this horrible situation.
There's a question there straight away. Is it fiction? I mean, I understood it's pretty much a true story. I know there are some inaccuracies in it, but I don't know if there's any historical drama that's ever been made that doesn't have inaccuracies in it. So I would defend that part of it as well. But one of the arguments I read there, I think it was The Guardian this week, it said the tattooist of Auschwitz is well made, well acted, well intentioned and grotesque. I don't see how that can be grotesque, because what is fundamentally wrong is that the idea of setting a love story within a prisoner of war camp, I don't know if that's really wrong, because what I felt was the essence of this. I thought what the real strength was of this triumph of the human spirit, this battle over adversity, this idea to show that love, that passion, that friendship, that connection can grow in the most ugly, awkward, diverse of circumstances imaginable. I thought that the series had all of that. I thought that had that intention at the very least. Now, once you actually start to play it out, and then show the component parts, you go back to Auschwitz, you show the relationship. It does look a little bit strained, it does look a little bit weak, and then you flash forward and then you go into modern day times to see the story being told in flashback by Harvey Keitel, and it becomes a bit weak there as well. So I think that there's that problem and that juxtaposition of getting the modern day reality with that historical perspective, that poignancy that you're really looking for at that time. I think that doesn't sit well all the time. However, I think the intention of it is fairly strong, and I will be continuing to watch it.
Right. Ewan, what did you think? And have you seen many dramas around the Holocaust?
Yeah, so I've seen Schindler's List, and I remember in school we watched The Boy in the Striped Pyjamas, which was just incredibly harrowing, and both movies actually.
And that was another movie that actually caused caused some controversy as well. But
Did it?
yeah,
Right.
yeah. I can't remember the detail, but
Yeah,
maybe
because it was most of it's fiction. That was the problem.
right.
Right.
Okay.
So similar in
It could never have happened. That
Right.
tale with the young boys and the friendship, the connection between them.
Well,
Right.
this just shows the level of sensitivities around
absolutely.
depicting this in drama.
But I felt that it dealt with the subject matter respectfully. There was no point in which I felt that that it was being dealt in a way that wasn't respectful. And actually, I think it highlighted I mean, we all know and recognise how terrible the Holocaust was. But I think stories that are told in this way that remind and refresh, I think, in terms of just how merciless it was, just how unjust it was. And there was a scene in particular in this movie that caught me in a way that I wasn't really necessarily sure that it would have. But he was getting off, so the main character, obviously, Lally, was getting off the cattle cart that he'd been transported from where he was living to Auschwitz. And he was removing his luggage, and his luggage was taken off him. And he said to, I think, one of the guards, "When am I going to get this back?" And for me, I don't know why it was that particular scene that just took me back, because it was the lack of understanding that we all now know as to what was inevitably going to happen. And then things like showing the smokestacks, for example, as well, and knowing that was human souls, I think is just, when you see that in any form, actually, to be honest, I think it really takes you a step back, and you have to kind of process it in a way, and you're then thinking about, in general, just the Holocaust and how horrendous it was. So I'm going to stick with it.
Had you read the book?
I hadn't read the book, no, but my girlfriend had read the book, so she was able to kind of compare what was in the book versus what was in the kind of TV adaptation.
And does she feel it's true to the book, at least?
Yes, she did, and she wants to continue watching it as well. So the two of us are going to keep watching it, and I thought it was definitely worth sticking with.
Okay, how did you feel about it, Rachel?
I find this kind of idea of the controversy of fiction about the Holocaust quite interesting, because they've been making films and dramas about this for like since about the 60s.
Well, the first one I ever saw was called Holocaust with Meryl Streep. That was her first starring role on the first mini-series on TV, and it was fictionalised, but it was the first thing that I remember depicting the Holocaust that brought home to young audiences that didn't know what happened.
I mean, you look at, there was The Night Porter with Dirk Bogarde and Charlotte
remember
Rampling
that
in
film.
74, and then there's always been controversies about doing these dramas. I think Roberto Benigni, and the Italian comedian in the 90s, did a comedy about the Holocaust, and it was really controversial. It was actually, but I remember it was very good, but it was very controversial. I think it's always a controversial topic, but the thing is, it's always a topic that gets a lot of attention, and people do, for commercial reasons, people will commission those kind of programmes because people will watch them.
Well, this book sold millions of copies.
They do. I mean, as someone said to me, like, if you want to write non-fiction that sells in the UK specifically, then you need to write about Nazis or the Tudors. That's the two things that will always sell your books.
We'll be talking about the Tudors later in the drama.
People, they are really, really compelling stories, and I think one of the reasons the Holocaust is so compelling, because it was the first time that there was destruction of people in such an industrial scale, and how horrific it was. And I think we would do well not to forget that. And I do think the drama has, although I didn't find the love story particularly compelling, and I did think that the actor that played Lally, I did think he didn't.
The young actor
that played Lally. I mean, Harvey Keitel was very good, but Harvey Keitel was very good reading the Yellow Pages out. I found the young actor that played Lally wasn't convincing, but I did.
I would agree with you there. I didn't think he quite had the depth.
He's kind of too pretty boy, nice looking. But at the same time, I do think the horror of the Holocaust is that sort of industrial scale of destruction is something that we shouldn't forget. But what I also wonder is there is an element where that's the story that we tell. We don't really tell the stories about the Gulag. We don't really tell the stories about, there's not that many big films about the destruction in Argentina in the 80s. And I think because it was never on the same scale, and the Gulag was much slower in terms of, I think, essentially Stalin's Gulag killed more people, but it took him 15 years as opposed to 3. And And I do think it's still important that it's done in drama, and I do understand that people want it to be as realistic as possible. I found quite a lot of it really quite gross, and I had to fast forward things.
Yeah.
But I think I find those things too upsetting, and I think there are things
we all
that people
do.
should remember, that is what humans are capable of doing to each
Does
other.
that make it wrong?
Which
See,
is
that,
really
I
important.
think that's the big question there. If you dramatise a true event like this, which is a horrific story, then it becomes entertainment. Because we watch it. That's why we watch. We watch
I also
to be
think
entertained.
but I also think
and
it's
that's
about
the essence of the argument here.
But I think it's also about knowledge. I don't think anybody watches that to have a good time. I think you have to accept people are not going to read incredibly long
I don't think
books.
it's a good time, Rachel. I think it's that question mark in entertainment and inverted commas there, because we watch it we want to be engrossed, we want to be pulled in, we want to be attracted to that story.
But we
tale.
also want it to make us think. And to educate ourselves as well, and that sometimes involves not looking away.
I mean, something like 7 Years a Slave. I thought I could not watch that film, but I don't think it was wrong to be made. I just think, I read factual books about that, and then I go.
Well, that's right, but that's what I'm saying. But many newspaper writers this week have said it's wrong for this to be made, and I don't think it is wrong at all.
I don't think it's wrong.
I think you're both in agreement there. Yeah. Are you going to continue watching it? Do you think, Rachel?
I can't watch. I can't do that kind of thing. It's too much for me.
Well, it'll be interesting if anybody out there has seen The Tattooist of Auschwitz or indeed read the book. Let me know your thoughts about dramatising this and what you thought. In the meantime, you can stream all episodes of The Tattooist of Auschwitz on Sky and Now TV. And still to come, we'll be looking at 2 more adaptations of best-selling books. It's just the way it's worked out this week. Shard Lake, that's the one set in Tudor times, and A Man in Full, based on the Tom Wolfe novel. Are they more successful than The Tattooist of Auschwitz? And what is your ideal movie length? You can let me know and give me your thoughts on that or anything else we're talking about today. It's 80295 to text. And this week, we got the sad news that Scottish actor Brian McCarthy had died at the age of 59. He was perhaps best known to many of us as gangster Tommy Hunter on Line of Duty.
Good. So what do you want in return?
I want Jackie's body up in smoke.
Problem is, she's my leverage. How about this as plan A? You do as you're told. And if you ever choose to not play ball, my boys unload Jackie's body and you go down for her murder. Now, turn this thing around. There's a good lad. I can still make the second tee.
Yeah, Brian McCarthy, who died suddenly this week. As I said, Brian, best known to many of us for playing that hard man character, but there was more to him than that. You interviewed him on a few occasions.
Yeah, I did, and I met him socially as well. And I think that one of the things about Brian McCarthy was that I don't know, I can't honestly think of another Scottish actor who managed to show such delicious menace as Brian McCarthy. I don't know if there was anybody quite so quietly frightening and terrifying and potentially psychopathic as Brian McCarthy. I thought he was fantastic. I remember seeing him way back in early days of Rob Roy and Michael Keaton-Jones' film, and Keaton-Jones obviously thought Brian was fantastic, and he employed him recently in the Sopranos film as well. But Brian could do great detective, he could great hardman, but he could also be really, really funny, and he could be incredibly intuitive as an actor as well. I can remember speaking to him a few years ago when he was playing the part of James Connolly in a Tron Theatre play, and he didn't know anything about James Connolly, the revolutionary, the Scottish revolutionary who fought in Ireland. And he said to me, I did some work, and he said, I've read 53 books about James Connolly so far. And I said, Brian, I think you're taking it a little bit too far. And he said, no, I really need to get inside his head And he did, and he co-wrote the play with his brother as well along the way. But that just showed that the dedication, the impact that Brian McCarthy wanted to make once he appeared on stage as a character. And I said to him, have you enjoyed playing Connolly along the way? And he said, the biggest problem is I had to grow a James Connolly moustache, which I've come to realise is absolutely repellent to women. So he realised that sometimes you had to suffer for your art as well. But off stage, he was quiet, he was reserved, he was really, really well spoken, very bright and interested in other people. That's what I came across about Brian McCarthy. And what an incredible loss at the age of just 59 as well. We expected so much from him in the future, and it's so sad we're not going to have that.
Indeed, and I also wanted to reflect this week, Ibrox-born Scottish singer and pantomime star Chris McClure, better known by his stage name Christian, died this week at the age of 80. He quite a stalwart of the panto scene and the Scottish entertainment scene back in the day.
Yeah.
Well, even more recently.
Well, yeah, I mean, quite an incredible life Chris had as well. I mean, it's run on for 60 years in terms of his career. He formed the Chris McClure section. He was one of the biggest bands in Scotland in his day. He brought soul music into Scotland. He was the man who would be up there on stage singing James Brown songs or whatever along the way. And Chris was just a fantastic character. And what I really loved about him, I remember Pavilion manager Ian Gordon used to manage Chris at one point, or drive the bus up and down the country as part of the band. And they were touring everywhere at one point. They were touring Dundee one minute, Aberdeen the next, then all the way down to the borders, then back up. And they all get fed up. They absolutely had enough. So they phoned up the management company one day and said, the bus is broken down. And it was a complete lie. The bus hadn't broken down at all. It was an excuse for all the boys in the band and the crew to go home and have a weekend off. But not Chris. Chris decided that he was so committed that this was his work ethic. It was like he would carry on playing the gigs regardless. So ended up going up to Galsby to a golf club to play a gig on his own, and he ended up playing soul hits along with an accordion and a snare drum alone. So you can imagine him, he was sitting there singing, sitting on the dock of the bay with an accordion and a single drum. And
I'd love to hear that.
That was Chris McClure. He just would not turn up for work. What a fantastic character.
Okay, well, two Scottish talents that we lost this week, Brian McCarthy and Chris McClure, or Christian. With my guests, Brian Beacom, Ewan Blockley and Rachel McCormack. Now, were you a subscriber to this decades-old institution?
What's inside this capsule may help prevent the flu, colds, and even ease arthritis. It's vitamin E, and you learn about it in Reader's Digest. This ancient art has become a little too popular with today's kids. How do you stop them from getting tattoos? The answer is in Reader's Digest. No magazine gives you so much up-to-date advice while bringing you fascinating stories about inspiring individuals.
Oh, those were the days. Well, if you were a subscriber, sadly, you won't be anymore after it was announced that after 86 years, the UK edition of Reader's Digest would end, effective immediately. Editor-in-Chief Eva Makovich wrote on LinkedIn, it just couldn't withstand the financial pressure of today's unforgiving magazine publishing landscape. I'm going to the youngest person in the room. Are you Gen Z? Ewan?
Yeah, I think.
So,
wish I wasn't, but yeah.
Reader's Digest ever on your radar?
So my granny had copies of it. I can picture, when we were talking about this, I can picture it on the coffee table, and she would have a few of them, but I never read them. And
they were always on dentist waiting room tables as well. Yeah,
my gran's living room must have been similarly laid out. But it was just one of those things that was just kind of there, and something that you would frequently hear about. And listening to that advert as well, I mean, that is just, it definitely dates itself for sure. But.
Yeah, and lots of memories of the Reader's Digest, and that was kind of, pre-internet, where people just got a wee hodgepodge of everything that was being said all over the world, about food, about decor, whatever.
I don't think people understand how difficult it was to find things out. You know,
we were trying to explain this to Ewan before we came on air, and his
and
mind was blown.
He was just sort of looking at us going, what are you old people talking about? What is going on here? And it is that thing you completely forget. And it's sort of like, you know, it's the decoration. Like if you put a load of encyclopedias and a load of Reader's Digest on a shelf and you were doing historical drama, everybody
encyclopedias,
would know that was the 1970s.
You and they were actually books. We're not talking Wikipedia here.
There were books and there were also books written by qualified people, and they weren't just edited as and when by random individuals saying goodness knows what and just making up stuff as they went along. It actually had to be vaguely true to get an encyclopedia. And it's really interesting. It's kind of interesting to see how those things were really relying on an age. There was kind of an age that you started getting the Reader's Digest, and saying there was kind of an age that you started listening to Radio 4. And obviously the people who are that age are me, and I would no longer think of getting a Reader's Digest, and I would run through my day. It was something my granny got, and I think even my parents' generation, like my parents never got the Reader's Digest.
Yeah.
It was very much something kind of went with that generation.
Yeah.
And it is that thing of now you can look. I suppose the good thing is now you can find out whatever's going on in the world. The bad thing is that you don't enough. Those articles were random, so you find that as you've got an algorithm that narrows and gives you more and more of what you want to read.
That's a
at
good
least
point,
with
actually.
with the Reader's Digest. But what I mean is, it's not even just from a political point of view, but like if you're not that interested in what's going on in the moon, then you never see anything about what's going on in the moon on any of your internet searches.
Yeah.
Whereas at least you were presented with something and found out random stuff about the world that you never thought you were interested in.
Brian?
Yeah, all of that's absolutely true. I like the fact that small size was designed for the pocket of overalls, because it clearly had a sort of mildly aspirational people who you could walk around and carry a Reader's Digest with you. I would read them on occasion. I never bought them, but I would go into my friend Davy Todd's house, and his mother's always had them up on their shelves. She would collect them for years and years and years, and for whatever reason to dip back into them at some point along the way. And they did. There was always a story in there that always grasped you, whether it was laughter is the best medicine, or I like this one here, I am John's left testicle. I don't know what that, I'd love to know what that one was all about, right from a perspective of somebody's body part. But fascinating, and I thought it was a lovely little magazine of its time, but it clearly wasn't going to last too long. Although at one point, I mean, it did make fantastic amounts of money. It had 17 million subscribers in the year. So that just gives an idea how big this was.
They were so wealthy that their HQ in Manhattan had Picassos and Van Goghs hanging on the wall.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
I want to know what happened to them. That's what I want to know. Never mind anything else. What happened to the paintings?
But you know that Reader's Digest is still going on in the US. I mean, who knows for how long?
And what I liked that little part from the introduction as well, that it gave there were stories in it about warning young people about getting tattoos. They should be bringing it back. If only for that reason, people should read that column, the Reader's Digest, to avoid getting don't get a tattoo, and don't.
No.
Read
No, because I read the Reader's Digest. So.
Okay, memories. Well, if you got any memories about the Reader's Digest, do let us know. 80295.
I know you want to leave me, but I refuse to let you go.
Now that's a big oldie.
For that fresh, clean, big feeling, it's Oldies 100.
And with the radio blasting, goes cruising just as fast as she can now. And she'll have fun.
Now that's a big oldie.
Oldies 100, in the car and all day long.
And you're listening to Shereen Nanjiani here on BBC Radio Scotland with my guests Brian Beacom, Ewan Blockley and Rachel McCormick. And now to our second TV adaptation this morning. This time it's Tom Wolfe's A Man in Full. Jeff Daniels stars as the foul-mouthed Charlie Croker in this Netflix series that's perhaps trying to fill the succession hole in your life.
Charlie Croker is the biggest hero of real estate in Atlanta. The problem is, he's going bankrupt. Mr. Croker, party's over.
You won't take your shot? You better make it your best one. Nothing can kill me. I'm not sure who the hell you think you're talking to.
Charlie is disgusting. And his debt could be your debt.
I don't just want to take down your ex-husband. I want to devour him.
Let's eat!
What is my calling?
Keeping Charlie from being at his worst. You think I can take him?
Is that important?
Well, there's a flavour of A Man in Full on Netflix. Croker is an Atlanta real estate tycoon who must claw his way back to the top when his empire begins to crumble. It also stars Diane Lane and Lucy Liu, and it's adapted for the screen by David E. Kelly of Ally McBeal and Big Little Lies. And Tom Wolfe, Brian, you know, back in the 80s, 90s maybe, was a huge novelist. I'm thinking, I read Bonfire of the Vanities, and the movie adaptation was not very successful. This seems to have taken a long time. I've not read this one, but it's taken a long, long time to come to the screen.
Yeah, and part of the reason that is because Tom Wolfe's novels encapsulate so many different themes and so many subplots and strands that it's very difficult to condense.
So you would think that a streaming service would be the way to do it, because you can get that long form.
Yeah, you would get the long form and you get it running over 6 parts or whatever as well. I think that there's a couple of problems associated with this. I think just you mentioned David Kelly, which was interesting, David E. Kelly. Since 2016, Kelly's had did 14 streaming series or mini-series.
14?
14. And I think the big problem that David E. Kelly has is he's just trying too much at the one time. And as a result, I think it really illustrates itself in this series because it doesn't know what it's supposed to be about. What you've got is this big central figure who represents greed in America. He runs this massive corporation in Atlanta, and we're supposed to be frightened, disgusted, shocked by his behaviour. The big problem we have now is that events have overtaken him, and we've already got Donald Trump, who's likely to become the next president of the United States. So on one hand, we've got fiction, then we've got reality, which is even bigger than fiction. So how can fiction stand up to be accountable?
What about the comparisons that some have made to Succession?
I don't think there's any comparison whatsoever. I thought Succession was clever. It was single-focused. It was about a single family and looking at the life and career of a man and his family downward and how it impacts upon their lives. I don't think there's any comparison at all. I think the writing in Succession was fantastic. This isn't great writing. In fact, I think the biggest part of this, the strongest part of this, is the subplot when you have a story about a young black man who beats up a police officer and finds himself in court. That's more interesting how that's dealt with rather than the trials and tribulations of Charlie Croker's life.
Okay, I mean, I always love watching Jeff Daniels. He always does Jeff Daniels, but he does it brilliantly. But I'm not quite sure of this so far. Ewan, what do you think?
I'm the same as you, right? Jeff Daniels, love him. He was in Newsroom, which was a show that I watched when it came out many, many years ago, and I absolutely loved it. And I fell in love with him as an actor, and I thought he was fantastic. So when I heard he was in this, I thought, oh, great, because he steals the show. He's a real presence on screen. And he was, there's no question, but I just hated his character, which I think was kind of the intention, but not in the way that's the kind of anti-hero. I just didn't
not in a Logan Roy way.
Yes, exactly. And I didn't think he was well written in that respect. And I felt he was probably a bit let down with the writing, and I just thought it was a mess. I agree though with Brian in terms of the secondary story that was going on in terms of his car being over that red line and therefore being arrested was far, far more interesting. And if that had maybe been the primary story, I maybe would have been more interested. But him as a character and then all the other people around him, I wasn't gripped, so I won't be watching any more of it.
Okay, I mean, some critics that I've read who had read the book said that the problem is it can't condense, a dense storyline like that. But it might also be timing, as Brian said. Events have overtaken. Yeah,
I think it's both. I think the thing is, Wolfe was brilliant at that very 90s America. He wrote these really incredibly complex novels about what was going on in 90s America, and we're now in 2024, and that makes it quite difficult for the way things have moved on. You know, basically the Black Lives Matter story is far more interesting than the main one about the rich guy. My issue in terms of characterisation is that if you're supposed to hate him, the main character's supposed to be at least clever. At least, you know, you knew in Succession whenever Logan Roy walked into a room, you knew that he was the cleverest guy in the room, and everybody jumped when he said jump. They all said how high. Everybody did everything he wanted to do because he could run them all. This guy, this character, I know it's just Jeff Daniels playing Jeff Daniels, but he just doesn't seem clever enough. It's almost like he's not sure if he's trying to be a Bush or he's trying to be Trump. And kind of, and it doesn't. To me, it doesn't work in between because there's nothing compelling about him.
Okay.
And if you're going to be really hateful, you have to be compelling, and he's definitely not. And I didn't think it worked for both reasons of adaptation and the timing.
Briefly, anyone going to continue with it?
I might give it a little bit.
I think I'll give it a...
Just to see, because it's supposed to be greed. I want to see how it works and if it does focus on that sharp greed.
All episodes of A Man in Full are available on Netflix right now. We've got a text from Caroline in West Kilbride. She got in touch on Tattooist of Auschwitz. She says, I've read this book but not seen the TV series. I will watch if I get a chance. I've visited many camps in Europe and there is no dramatisation that can ever bring it home the way standing in a camp can.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I recently watched the film Zone of Interest, which I'd also recommend to listeners. And a text in on Reader's Digest. We kept our Reader's Digest in a wire basket next to the loo. I read many a condensed novel sitting on the throne. I shall remain anonymous. Thank you for that. We'll be back after 11 with more to come. Gavin and Stacey returning to tie up loose ends in the iconic comedy series. Will the mystery at the heart of Shardlake keep our panel watching? And as parents of Swifties are offered a college course to bring them up to speed, we're reminiscing on gigs you went to with your parents and the ones you've taken your kids to. Tell us your best and worst. 80295. Hello again, you're listening to Saturday Mornings on BBC Radio Scotland with me, Shereen Nanjiani. My guest today, former Scottish Conservative councillor Ewan Blockley, food and drink writer Rachel McCormick and the Herald's Brian Beacom. And the four of us are going to be mulling over more of the big talking points this week, including the return of Gavin and Stacey, Disney's answer to Wolf Hall, Shardlake, and after Glasgow College offers parents a chance to learn about Taylor Swift, what were the gigs that you went to with your parents and what have your children dragged you along to? Tell us your best and worst. You can text us on 80295 or use the hashtag Shereen. Some more texts in on Reader's Digest, memories of Reader's Digest. In 1973, I read the abridgment of Rachel Carson's Silent Spring. This book sounded the alarm on the danger of pesticides and started the environmental movement. It started my journey on protecting the planet. That's from Margaret Forbes in Blainfield. My mother is 91 and had the occasional Reader's Digest, but she still, to this day, gets her copy of The People's Friend delivered to the door. That's from Ross in Glasgow. Absolutely loved the Reader's Digest when I was younger. Used to read it in the dentist's waiting room, as you said. Gutted it's no longer being published in the UK. Terrible news. That was from an anonymous texter there. You know, think we were going to hear something that was nearly 5 years ago since we saw it on our screens, and this cliffhanger.
You know you're all right as you are, don't you, Smithy? I won't lie, you're not everyone's cup of tea, but at the end of the day, when all's said and done, you're tidy.
Cheers.
I mean so. And I know it's been complicated. You and me. All this like.
Whatever this is.
But I love her. And if truth be told, I loves you.
Yeah, I know.
No, Smithy, you're not listening. I knows it's weird, or I. But I do. I loves you. With all my heart. So, will you marry me?
What?
Well, that was Gavin and Stacey from I think it was 2019, the Christmas special. And this week, James Corden and Ruth Jones have confirmed that they finished writing the final episode, which will air on BBC One on Christmas Day this year, and presumably will resolve that cliffhanger. You were getting all gooey-eyed when you were listening to that, Rachel.
I loved that programme. I loved the programme because they were all just kind of slight exaggerations of reality. Do you know, like when I can't remember Ruth Jones' character's name, but you should go line dancing in random small towns in Wales, and you just knew that's what it was like. And Alison Steadman as Gavin's mum, she was
brilliant.
Oh, absolutely loved her. And she'd have a wee headache and she wouldn't really know what was wrong with her, then she'd feel fine. Or even, they were the first people to really do that the way people do with songs when they come in and everybody starts joining in and singing away, and or trying to make jokes and talking to each other in jokes. And there was one bit when Gavin's dad manages to get on the local news, and it's the sensation of the whole programme, and the whole family are sitting together desperate for him to get on the news when it's a line about some murderer that might have been in the park, which it was just that's the way people are, and it's just that's what I loved about it so much. And I'm kind of not really bothered whether this storyline is solved. It's just the idea that they would just get back together for one episode. It's kind of proper Christmas Day telly. It's kind of like you have Doctor Who, which is the kind of thing you need to have, and then you have some sort of older, sort of gentler kind of comedy that just resolves itself with a new episode of some kind. It was brilliant comedy because it was just so slightly exaggerated real.
Yeah. I'm glad to see it come back, because so many times on this show we've said, that was absolutely great, but they should have quit while they were ahead. They should have left it there, left it on that cliffhanger perhaps.
Yeah, I'm going to be an absolute hypocrite in this one as well. I thought it was a great cliffhanger. Will you marry me? And it didn't go anywhere, and I thought, what a fantastic ending. But yeah, I still want to know more. I still want to know what happened in Uncle Bren's fishing trip. I don't know if we ever will find out there. But what I think was interesting about Rachel's point there as well, this was a series that worked on so many different levels. Incredibly dark at times. It really got into the heart of relationships. It showed about how pragmatic couples could be, and how they would see the relationship being of the moment and then moving on. So you had the two structures going at the same time there with Gavin, Stacey, and Ness, and with James Corden's character as well, which was absolutely fantastic. So really want to see more of it, want to see how it plays out. And even if we don't get some kind of resolution at the end, I don't think that's too matter. What we want to do is go on that adventure once again. We want to go back to Barry Island, and we want to live in that little world that they encompass, and all the little delightful characters that appear along the way, including Alison Steadman.
Well, we will look forward to that at Christmas. There's a wee way to go till then. And still to come, the last of the best-selling book adaptations that we're reviewing, Shard Lake. What do our panel care about who done it? And still looking to hear about the gigs you went to with your parents, or that you've taken your children to. This is after a Glasgow college announced it was offering parents a lesson on Taylor Swift. You can text us on 80295. Now, we're still awaiting some key results today. The local elections in England and Wales have been deeply disappointing, to say the least, for the Conservative Party and the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. Labour made some big gains, mostly the 26% swing and most notably the 26% swing in the Blackpool South by-election.
The people of Blackpool South have spoken for Britain. They have said to Rishi Sunak and to the Conservatives, they've had enough. They've had enough of 14 years of the Conservatives being in power. They have lost trust of the British people, and Blackpool has had enough of this failed government.
Well, that was a new Labour MP, Chris Webb, who won that seat with a record swing in votes. It has also been a good week for Reform UK, the Greens and other independents, nearly up 200 councillors altogether so far. This is pretty dismal for the Conservatives, Rachel, again.
It's kind of not a surprise. I mean, if you look at the way the country's been run for the past 15 years and you look at the disaster that Brexit's been, it's not a surprise. I mean, if you look at where we're standing economically compared to countries of like the same, we're nowhere near the same countries. We've got nearly 10 million people in the whole of the UK who are facing hunger crisis in one of the richest countries in the world. It's just immoral. The things that Tories governments are supposed to be really good at, which is security and business, are both dismal failures as well. Our security is really terrible. We've got like ex-KGB, the sons of ex-KGB agents are now in the House of Lords because of the Tory government. I mean, nothing that Tories should do as governments, they're doing properly, and everything that's bad about Tory governments, inequality and problems of poverty, have just got so much worse. Our infrastructure's crumbling. I don't really see how it was ever going to be anything but terrible news for them. I think that the thing that's kind of interesting about this is about the election to look at really is Reform is not doing as well as everybody thinks. There's a big sort of jump about them, but they're actually doing not nearly as well as UKIP was doing about the same time, sort of in the trajectory of their party. And I do think the Greens seem to be taking over the Lib Dems as a kind of third space. This might be more problematic than you think, because the Greens, when it comes into doing policies, aren't necessarily that good. They were in power in Brighton and it was quite a mess. You know, they would kind of pass these very good environmental laws and then realise actually not using pesticides meant that if you have a wheelchair or crutches you can't walk down the street. And I do think the actual story here is really the Greens and what's going to happen with them as they become more used to having council seats and getting into power.
Okay, as a Conservative, there is no way you can spin this positively.
No, not positively. What I will attempt to do is to give a general overview as to what these elections are, which is council elections and local elections, which is incredibly important. There's obviously local factors that play in a variety of these. Now, I'm not going to say for a second that these are good results, because they're not. But what happens in local elections is people often use them. Number one, incredibly low turnout. I think that's an important point to raise. That happens in local elections, and as a former councillor myself, I can attest to that.
30%, I think it is.
Yeah, that's low. And by the way, that's a big problem in this country that we should be addressing to get more people, because local elections are actually arguably the most important, because the services that people rely on and often complain about to their MP, for example, it's actually councillors that are dealing with it.
But there is a pattern emerging, and Professor John Curtis was saying, it does indicate that the Conservatives are very, very likely to on this pattern to lose a general election.
Yeah, and in England and Wales, the Conservatives are looked set to lose seats. I think in Scotland, there is obviously a difference there.
Is there?
Yes, because what we're seeing, if you've looked at recent opinion polls, you're actually seeing the Scottish Conservatives gain seats, and a large part of that is to do with the huge collapse in the SNP vote.
Well,
but also
let's stick with England just now.
Yeah, but I think living in
the
Scotland,
general election.
But I think living in Scotland, I think it's also important to keep that perspective in mind. mind is that, you can look at these results in England and Wales, but as to whether that transpires directly here in Scotland,
yeah, but it kind of matters because they'll be the government in England, so which means that they'll be.
And Scotland will have a huge part to play in that election.
No, we won't, because we never do. But the whole of the UK, we're talking about elections in the whole that are important for the whole of the UK, and you can't do this one nation Tory stuff and start spinning for Scotland constantly when actually this is all about what's going to happen in Westminster as part of the UK. And you have to accept that English local elections are hugely, hugely important for the UK.
Finish your point.
Yeah, because I do live in Scotland, so I care about what happens here. But I think in terms of looking at the rest of the UK, as I said before, turnout is a big thing. So you look at Blackpool, for example, the Labour vote has maybe actually increased in terms of total votes by about 500-600. But actually, if you look at the amount of people who have stayed at home, like, for example, the complete collapse in the Conservative vote, you've seen that it's actually a large amount of that's to do with turnout. And what the real story is going to be here...
So they're all going to turn out the general election?
No, that's not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying is it will be interesting to see how we manage to win over those voters, whether we do at all, whether they go to Reform, whether they choose to stay at home. I think that's going to be the big story at the next election, is turnout, whether Conservatives decide to vote Reform, whether they decide to vote Labour, whether they decide to stay at home or decide to back the Conservatives. And I think that will be the interesting story going into the next election.
Brian?
Well, I think the interesting story is how Labour has managed to pull together those seats that they felt were marginal, and then now they're looking as if they've got a very, very strong chance of winning the general election. I think probably the caveat to that is some of the Muslim votes that they've lost along the way in areas such as Oldham, which would be worrying for the Labour Party, and that's definitely a concern at this point in time.
This is thought to be because of the situation in Gaza.
Yeah, absolutely. And but as John Curtis said, it's 99% sure Keir Starmer will be PM, and I think that's something that Ewan's just got to have to come to terms with.
Oh, I mean, look, there is a huge... I'm not beating about the bush here. There is a massive chance that, I mean, we've seen stranger things happen, but it looks like Keir Starmer's going to be the next Prime Minister, right? And I think Conservatives up and down the country will probably need to accept that it's going to be a hammering at the next general election. But what I was saying is that in Scotland, there is a completely different distinction into, number one, how people view the Scottish Conservatives and the work we're doing in Holyrood, as we've seen in the last week.
Right, let me ask you about Rishi Sunak. Do you think he will be leading the Conservatives into the next election? Do you think he'll hold on?
Yeah, of course. Because, I mean, as we saw with the Conservative Alliance or whatever these kind of people on the extreme right of the Conservative Party have been saying, who have wanted to get rid of him for a very long time, is, well, who do you put in? I mean, who else would you necessarily
I think that's exactly the same. And it's a similar situation you have here with John Swinney in Scotland. You're not going to change the person in charge at this moment in time because there's too much involved in it. And who would you bring in to replace Rishi Sunak, considering the number of Prime Ministers that you've had in recent years as well?
Correct.
Okay. We're all agreeing. It's all lovely.
It's too easy.
It's all lovely. Let's move on.
Next Saturday, the Red Sox face the Orioles or see the Padres take on the Dodgers. This summer, it's baseball on CBS.
Feel the heat of TV's hottest game shows. First, the frantic fun of Press Your Luck. Join Peter Tomarkin as he welcomes contestants who try to beat the whammies and go for the big bucks. Then, come on down to America's most exciting show, hosted by Bob Barker. Watch contestants guess if the price is right. It's Press Your Luck and the Price is Right weekdays.
This is CBS. And coming up after us here on BBC Radio Scotland at 11:30, it's The Good, the Bad and the Unexpected with Mark Nelson. And this week he's joined by founding member of the Happy Mondays, Bez, BBC Radio Scotland presenter Vic Galloway, and stand-up comedian and author Shabarak Kersandi. And at 12, it's Off the Ball with Stuart and Tam, followed at 2 by Sports Sound with all the action from across Scottish football with open all mics on FM and BBC Sounds, plus live commentary of Celtic versus Hearts on digital radio, or ask your smart speakers to play BBC Radio Scotland Extra. At 7 o'clock tonight, it's Take the Floor with Gary Innes, and he'll be paying tribute to Cayley King, Fergie MacDonald, following his recent passing. And at 10 o'clock tonight, Billy Sloan wants to hear your nominations for your favourite albums which have one-word titles. And just looking ahead to tomorrow's Sunday morning programme, Connie McLaughlin's guests include award-winning writer Damien Barr, who will be discussing the role religion played in his upbringing in Bells Hill. And our Faith Forum panel will be chewing over Humza Yousaf's resignation speech and the former First Minister's comments on multiculturalism and the challenges of leadership. That's Sunday morning with Connie McLaughlin, tomorrow from 8 a.m. With my guests Brian Beacom, Ewan Blockley and Rachel McCormick. A text in on gigs. We took our son Jamie to see Squeeze as his first gig at aged 8. We also took him to see Bowie when he was about 15. My daughter Laura and I are seeing Joni Mitchell in October. That's from Steve in Bathgate. Now, monks, monasteries and murder. It's Disney's answer to Wolf Hall, Shard Lake.
Why, in this house of God, do I smell secrets and fear?
We have no secrets. And with respect, Master Shardlake, it is of you and Lord Cromwell we are afraid.
Master Shardlake, there's news of a death awaits you. Murder. It was him.
The guilty man must be identified and evidence listed. I am not above the laws of England, Matthew.
Well, no, my lord. As no man should be.
You will not fail me, neither of you. The house must fall.
Robin Singleton was killed by someone here. Someone within St. Donatus.
You're hiding.
Well, based on the popular novels of C.J. Sansom, Shard Lake is set in 1536 and follows Arthur Hughes as lawyer Matthew Shardlake, who finds his life turned upside down when Thomas Cromwell, portrayed there by Sean Bean, sends him to investigate a suspicious death at a remote monastery, and things only unravel further from there. It is fictionalised Tudor times. It's sort of murder mysteries, very popular novels, Rachel, and very sadly C.J. Sansom, who wrote them, his death was announced just the day before he finally saw it being dramatised.
I think that is sad, but I do also think you have to remember Samson sold those books in bucket loads, and in the end his work was well recognised. There was a lot of radio plays. I think they did a lot of the books into a long-standing radio plays on Radio 4. His books were incredibly popular. I mean, they sold in bucket loads, and I do think he had been waiting for a TV series until the 90s, but I do think people who are really into TV exaggerate how important writers find being on the telly when if they wanted to do that, they would have become screenwriters. It would have been much nicer for him to see, but I think he was well rewarded for what he did. I liked it. I thought it was really, I mean, whodunits are really popular, and his historical knowledge was very good. I do think it's really interesting from a TV point of view to look at both the real big influence of Wolf Hall, the TV series, on it, in terms of the lighting when they're in the monastery having dinner, is the amount of candle lighting that's involved, because Wolf Hall did that very, very successfully. They very deliberately kind of chose
very dark.
Tudor lighting, which you can see the influence of that, and you can also, I found really interestingly, seeing the influence of Bridgerton, because for example the abbot is a very posh West African, and the accent is very deliberately posh West African. And I thought that was it's really interesting to see how historical fiction is changing. It is a really good whodunit. I think the fact that the character of Shardlake is disabled, and the actor in this case is disabled, and it plays that very well. There are some script problems that you can see where they're not quite sure what to do with the adaptation of the book, so they've got Shardlake talking to himself to try and give you the exposition that you'd get in the novel.
Yeah,
but I thought
kind of forgive them that.
But
though.
I thought as television, it worked really well. I think they've got the right music intrigue in it, and if I had a subscription, I would definitely keep watching. And I think if you like whodunits and you like murders, and everybody likes the Tudors, then you should definitely watch it.
Yeah, I think this will keep me going to the sequel of Wolf Hall comes out, Ewan, which I think they've started filming already. What did you think of Shard Lake?
Yeah, I loved it. I loved it. I think it helped that I was listening to a podcast like a week before about the Protestant Reformation, which obviously some of this has somewhat to do with, particularly to do with Cromwell. Not the Cromwell that many people know, but I think it was his great grandfather or something along those lines, played by Sean Bean, who is fantastic and everything. And hopefully as the series progresses, there will be more Sean Bean.
I don't know. I don't think he's going to be in it very much.
Really?
I think they put Sean Bean in things just to get you watching, and then actually,
to hook you. Well, it worked.
Then it's off you go, Sean. We've got them in.
Well, it worked. It worked. The Sean Bean hook worked because I watched it to the end and I was getting increasingly invested in it. And I think the mystery of religion and the kind of Catholic Church of that era really fascinated me. And I think as a history buff in particular, although it is fiction, of course, this story, but it really took me in big style. So I'll be continuing to watch it.
Once again, it's that idea of fictionalising around a true context. Brian, did this work for you?
No, I didn't love it at all.
Did you not?
No, I really didn't like it. But then again, I'm so biased that I'm not. I don't like whodunits. This is just a whodunit. For me, whodunits don't work because they don't really invest that much in character. And I know you have a central character here, Shardlake, who's disabled, and that's supposed to be something we're playing an awful lot of, but there isn't really that much reference to it at all. So it's essentially about people in a room trying to solve a mystery, and because you don't get involved in the characters to any great extent, I can't really invest in them.
You don't. I like them. I actually think Arthur Hughes is very charismatic as
I don't think he does a bad job at all, but I don't think there's a lot to do. And as Sean Bean, that's a disgrace, bringing him in there for 2 minutes, like reeling him in. Wheeling him in, wheeling him back out.
For me, Brian.
It might be longer than 2 minutes, but anyway, Shardlake. I think that's 3-1 in favour of Shardlake, streaming now on Disney. But John in Stirling has been in touch on this, and he says if the TV drama isn't for you, the BBC radio drama of the series is absolutely wonderful. And I think Rachel, you agree with that too, don't you?
Mm-hmm. This is Shereen on BBC Radio Scotland. And he says, our song is a slam and scream door, sneaking alley, tapping on your window when we're on the phone and you talk real slow, 'cause it's late and your mama don't know. Our song is the way you laugh. The first date, man, I didn't kiss her and I should have. And when I got home, for I said amen, asking God if he could play it again.
Children to, and indeed the ones your parents took you to. And that is because ahead of Taylor Swift's concerts here next month, a college in Glasgow is offering a class for parents of Taylor Swift fans to get them clued up for what lies ahead. And judging by the from around the table, you'd think this is a daft idea, Ewan.
It's nonsense. It's nonsense. But then on the other hand, I'm kind of thinking, if I was into Taylor Swift, would my parents have a clue? Probably not. Would they want to be invested? I don't think they'd be.
Do you want your parents to get it?
No.
The music that you're in?
No, because then I think I'd want to listen to something else as a kid, wouldn't you? When you're kind of trying to be a bit rebellious. But I can't believe this exists. But it's a great story, I mean.
Well, I'm just going to find it incredible that Clyde College have actually staged this course. How did they sit round the table and say, let's come up with a course, let's do Taylor Swift?
It's just one day.
Somebody spent 400 quid on a ticket to take their 12-year-old. There's going to have spent 400 quid. I work at this college and I need a course to find out what I've just spent all my money on.
Is that what it's about?
Brian, have you ever taken younger family members to a gig? And what, if so, what?
I took a daughter to see Oasis one year, and that worked all right. That was okay. Haven't done it, but I tried to do it last year. Made a big effort to try and go and see James Taylor. Take a 70-year-old, because we've been looking at James Taylor songs and learning them over the years, and missed out on that. And I really cried. I was so disappointed that. So if James Taylor's back again anytime soon, I'll be going to see him.
Ewan, have you been taken by your parents to a gig ever?
Chance.
Would you have wanted to?
No, so I've always been very into kind of electronic music and techno music, and I can't imagine my mum or my dad doing like two-stepping and all that with the glow bands on and all that, glow sticks, no chance. So no.
Well, I have to read Stephen in Grangemouth's text, because he says, I went to see the Corries at the Edinburgh Playhouse with my dad and my brother and sister in 1980 and thoroughly enjoyed it. Do you know what? That's the only gig I ever went to with my parents. Anytime the Corries were at Paisley Town Hall, we all got dragged along, and I have to say I enjoyed it, but I was a lot younger then. What about you?
I remember my poor mother, the things I put her through. She took me to see Shakin' Stevens at the Apollo in about the late 70s, early 80s. So my mother
Was that
had to
for
sit
you
through it.
or
No,
for her?
It was for me. I think she had, the poor woman had to watch this, because my mother had really good taste in music. She used to listen to Grace Jones and Blondie all the time, and so the poor woman then had to sit through Shakin' Stevens and his Green Door.
But she never took you to anything by Grace Jones or Blondie. That's
No,
a shame.
I think probably Blondie's probably not very suitable for an 8-year-old at the Apollo, and I don't
Maybe
think Grace
not then.
Jones ever really played in Scotland, but
Yeah.
they are now on my playlist, so I do have to thank my mother for having given me good taste in music.
Oh,
Shaky.
right.
I was 8, okay, that was my excuse.
Yeah.
Shaky and his Green Door. I liked it.
We'll give you that. Okay, we've got to leave it there. Thanks to you and Rachel and Brian. I'll be here at 10 again. At 10 next Saturday. It's Comedy Now with Mark Nelson and The Good, the Bad and the Unexpected. Bye.